topic that we are going to discuss today is a little bit abstract. It's not exactly the way we have been doing the classes till now. It's not exactly about, one particular problem and then applying Schrodinger equation and then solving it, getting a result. This last topic is much more about your basic concepts, okay, the concepts that you will require for your further studies of quantum mechanics that you're going to do in your coming semesters. All right, so basically the topics that we are going to cover in this, all of you can see my screen. Can all of you
Yes,
see my
ma'am.
screen? Yes. So these are the topics that we are going to cover, okay. First of all, operator formalism. We have already used operators in different forms. We have seen how operators, how dynamical variables in quantum mechanics can be represented by operators, how we get the eigenvalue equation from operators. So we'll talk a bit about this operator formalism. Then we'll get an idea of Hilbert space. Okay. Now those who are going to continue with physics after your bachelor's, this is the thing that you're going to need. You are going to do your statistical mechanics, you're going to do your quantum mechanics entirely in Hilbert space. So an idea of Hilbert space is very, very important. We'll talk about what observables are. We'll see what determinate states are. Then we'll see what eigenfunctions of Hermitian operators are. And this is the most important, simultaneous measurements, compatible and incompatible observables. Okay. We'll talk about the uncertainty principle and then angular momentum and finally completeness of measurements. Okay. So several topics. So we'll quickly discuss each and then go to the next. Okay. But all these are very, very important concepts, basic concepts that you require to understand the formalism of quantum mechanics. So operator formalism. What is exactly operator formalism? What is an operator? Okay, basically an operator is just a mathematical rule to transform a given function, right? That's it's sort of a dressy name given to the mathematical operations we already know of: addition, multiplication, differentiation, etc. So some operator acts on a function psi x and gives you a different function phi x. So the function psi x is being transformed to the function phi x when the operator O cap acts on it. So this is the operator, this is the function, and this is the transformed function. All right. For example, if psi x is x to the power m, then I have given a table where I am showing you how different forms of this operator O give you different forms of phi x for the same function psi x, which is x to the power m. So if operator is square root, then phi x will be x to the power m by 2. If the operator is simply multiplication by a constant a into, then phi x is a x to the power n. If the operator is differentiation with respect to x, okay, d dx, then we know phi x will be mx to the power m minus 1. If the operator is integration, then result phi x is 1 by m plus 1 x to the power m plus 1 plus constant of integration, and so on. So there can be different forms of this operator, and depending on that, for the same function psi x, it will be transformed to different forms of phi x. This is exactly what we mean by operator formalism. Okay. So, and we know from the postulates of quantum mechanics that each dynamical variable in quantum mechanics is represented by an operator, which is why we are discussing this operator formalism in detail. Now, operator algebra is written in a different way. First of all, addition and subtraction. So a plus b operating on psi x will give you a psi x plus b psi x. A minus b operating on psi x will give you a psi x minus b psi x. Multiplication. So addition and subtraction are basically associative and commutative. If you change b, the positions of b and a, there won't be any change in the result. Now what happens with multiplication? Suppose a psi x is equal to phi x, okay, and b phi x is equal to fx. A operating on psi gives you phi, and b operating on phi gives you some function f. So b operating on a psi x, because phi x is basically a psi x, is giving you fx, right? So a b psi x, but a operating on b psi x is not fx, because b psi x, you don't know what is b psi x. So a operating on b psi x is not fx, which means that in general AB is not equal to BA. That is, in general, multiplication is not commutative. Okay. So now let us look at what commutators are. If in a special case, so we saw that in general AB is not equal to BA, where A and B are operators. Now if there arises some special case where AB is equal to BA, okay, then we say that A and B commute with each other. So this is a special case for operators. We know with scalars, multiplication is commutative. 2 into 3 is 6 is equal to 3 into 2. But for operators, we can see that this is not the case. In a special case, if they do follow this rule, then we say A and B commute. Okay. So the definition of a commutator is like this. AB within third bracket is equal to AB minus BA, and when the operators commute, then AB is equal to 0, which means AB minus BA equal to 0, which means AB equal to B. Okay. So when the operators don't commute, then AB not equal to 0. So AB equal to 0, so AB not equal. Okay. So this gives you a general idea about what commutators are, and this is a definition, the mathematical definition of a commutator operation, right? So let us take some example. Let us say that an operator is given by d dx and another operator b is d2 dx2. So AB psi x is d dx of d2 dx2 of psi x, which is d dx of d2 psi x dx2, which means d3 psi x dx3. Again, BA psi x is d2 dx2 d dx of psi x, so d2 dx2 of d psi dx, which is d3 psi dx3, which means in this case, according to the definition of the commutator, AB psi x equal to AB minus BA psi x. You write down the forms of AB and BA, so you get d3 psi x dx3 minus d3 psi x dx3 is equal to 0. So when A equal to d dx and B equal to d2 dx2, then the two operators A and B do commute. Okay, so d dx and d3 dx3 commute with each other. Let us take another example. A is x and B is d dx. Okay. So AB psi x is x d psi dx. BA psi x is d dx of x psi x, which is equal to psi x plus x d psi dx. Right? So according to the definition of commutator, AB minus BA psi x is x d psi dx minus psi x plus x d psi dx, which is equal to minus psi x, minus 1 into psi x. Okay, so definitely it is not equal to 0. So in this case, commutated AB is equal to minus 1. It is not 0, which means the operators x and d dx, they do not commute. Okay, so later on we will see what the physical interpretation of operators commuting and not commuting is. For the time being, these two examples, I hope, have given you the mathematical understanding of what we mean when we say when two operators commute and when they don't commute. Is there anything that you don't understand in these two examples? Because this is a very, very important operation that you need to know, commutator. Have you understood the two slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay. Now we'll go through quickly uh, what are the different types of operators that are there. Operators can be categorized into various types. So what are these types? In general, we won't go very deep into these, but we need to just know about what they are. So we can have linear operators. This is when an operator follows this rule, we say it is a linear operator where C is a constant. Okay. Any operator will commute with an arbitrary constant. In general, for linear operators, A plus minus BC is equal to AC plus minus BC. Okay. ABC equal to ABC for linear operators. Null operator is when an operator operating on a function gives you the result 0. It is called a null operator. Okay. Inverse operator for a linear operation t psi equal to phi. Linear operator means psi is inverse operator means psi is equal to t inverse phi, where you can find the inverse operator. So this is the inverse operator. Identity operator gives you back the same function. I psi gives you the same function psi. So it's like 1 in our scalar algebra. Singular and non-singular operator, suppose AB equal to BA equal to I, the identity operator. Okay. Then A inverse equal to B and B inverse equal to A. So if these reciprocals exist, then they are called non-singular operators. When will the reciprocal exist? When the reciprocal is non-zero. Okay. So then it is called a non-singular operator. But suppose A psi equal to 0 and psi not equal to 0, then A inverse cannot exist and then it will be called a singular operator. Clear what is singular and non-singular operator? You have to make sure that the reciprocal is non-zero. If the reciprocal is 0, then it will give you, then the result is not valid. So then it is called a singular operator. Number 6 is Hermitian operator. This is something that you need to know very well, the Hermitian operator, because all quantum mechanical operators are Hermitian operators. Now a Hermitian operator is one that satisfies this relation. Okay, psi n x, where psi n is a eigenfunction belonging to some eigenvalue en. So psi n x multiplied by A acting on psi m d tau is equal to A psi n whole star psi m. Okay, so psi star A psi m equal to, just a second, A psi n whole star psi m. If this relation exists, then this operator is called a Hermitian operator. Here psi n and psi m are both eigenfunctions of the operator A. Okay. A Hermitian operator is a linear operator and it always has real eigenvalues. Next is adjoint or Hermitian conjugate of an operator. If an operator A, and this sign is called a dagger sign, okay, it's like a T, small t. So if two operators A and A dagger satisfy this relation, psi n star A dagger psi m d tau equal to A psi n whole star psi m d tau, then we say that A dagger is the adjoint of the Hermitian conjugate operator of A. Okay, these are just definitions. Parity operator, it reflects the function in its coordinates. So parity operator is represented by pi. So pi psi x will give you psi of minus x. So it just reflects. It gives you the mirror deflection. Unitary operator, the inverse and the adjoint are always identical. If that is true, then you call it a unitary operator. Okay. U dagger U equal to U dagger equal to identity operator. The proof is given in the notes. I'll send you the notes. Now we will actually move. So these are operations. You don't need to learn them by heart, but you must know that these are the different types of operators that are present, okay, that you need to deal with. Now we will move on to a very, very important idea, and you will please stop me and ask me if you have any doubt in anything that I say. Please don't just keep on your phone in the Skype mode and do other work. Don't attend the class just for the sake of attending. Please try to pay attention and understand very well if you really want to learn this portion, because this is a very, very important portion but not very easy to understand. Okay, I'm declaring that from beforehand. So you need to really pay attention to whatever I'm saying. Okay, it's very abstract idea. Now, in quantum mechanics, we have dealt with the state of a system and we have observables or dynamical variables, right? The state of a system as psi x and observables or dynamical variables like position, momentum, energy, etc. So the state of a system is represented by a wave function, and the dynamical variables are represented by operators. Now, a wave function psi x can be represented by abstract vectors, and operators can be represented by linear transformations. We saw that an operator acting on a function gives you another function. So if the wave function is represented by a vector and the operator is a linear transformation, then linear transformation acting on a vector gives you another vector. So basically, quantum mechanics speaks the language of linear algebra. This is a very important statement that I just made. Quantum mechanics speaks the language of linear algebra, because in quantum mechanics there is nothing more or less than linear transformations transforming vectors. Okay? So only the difference is now that we have to think about working in n-dimensional space. When we do normal algebra, we work in the 1 or 2-dimensional space. When we are doing quantum mechanics, we only have to switch over to n-dimensional space. Okay. So how are the representations made in the n-dimensional space? First of all, a vector is written like this, okay? One straight line and one this angular bracket. This is called the bracket notation, okay? B-R-A-K-E-T, bracket notation. So a vector is written like this. Please follow very carefully, pay attention, I'm telling you. And if you don't understand anything, please stop me at that moment, unmute yourself and ask me your question. So a vector is written like this. This is a representation. What does it mean? In the n-dimensional space, it basically means the column matrix with n components. And its complex conjugate, because it's a vector in the n-dimensional space and it is not necessarily always real. So its complex conjugate is written like this, okay? the opposite of this, the direction. So the straight line goes here and the angular bracket changes its direction. So when you write a vector like this, you have to know that this is the complex conjugate of a vector like this. And it is a row matrix with n components, which are the complex conjugates of these components. Clear to everybody? Next, the three-dimensional dot product is now called the inner product. What we used to call the dot product in our vector algebra class will be now called the inner product, and it is written in this form: A B equal to A1 star B1 plus A2 star B2 plus etc. AN star Bn. Okay, you simply take the components of the first vector, take their complex conjugate and multiply with the corresponding components of the second vector, and that will give you the dot product, which is now called in the n-dimensional space as inner product. How are linear transformations represented? Matrices. Okay, since the vectors are now having n components and are represented as column or row matrices, so the linear transformations or operators will be represented by matrices. So T operating on A giving you B in the matrix notation is like this. This is the T matrix, an n cross n matrix operating on A giving you B. Okay. So what we have to remember is that in quantum mechanics, the vectors are actually functions. Okay. So they exist not even in n-dimensional space, but in infinite dimensional space. So a wave function, which is, representing a possible physical state, it must be normalized. Remember, in all the Schrodinger equation problems, at the end we were trying to normalize the wave function. Which, how is it done? Using Born interpretation, minus infinity to plus infinity mod chi square dx equal to 1. So they are square integrable. Remember, we discussed this, that in order to represent a particle, the wave function, which is a solution of the Schrodinger equation, must always be square integrable. Okay. So the set of all square integrable functions fx such that they follow this rule, integration minus infinity to plus infinity mod fx squared dx less than infinity, constitute a vector space called the Hilbert space. Okay. So what is the definition of the Hilbert space? Hilbert space is a space which consists of only square integrable functions. Okay. Hilbert space is a space where only square integrable functions are present. Which type of square integrable functions? Such that the result of the square integral is always less than infinity. Okay. So now in quantum mechanics, we can see that all functions are square integrable. We know that all functions in quantum mechanics are square integrable, and the value of the square integration is equal to 1. So since all functions are square integrable, so all functions in quantum mechanics, that is all wave functions representing particles, must exist in the Hilbert space. So try to understand. We started by saying that since the functions are representable by n-dimensional vectors, so since a vector in general is n-dimensional, so we need to switch to n-dimensional space. Next, we said that in quantum mechanics, the vectors are usually functions. So So we need to switch from n-dimensional space to infinite dimensional space. But you know, that makes your head turn. Infinite dimensional space, what are we going to look for in an infinite dimensional space? So to reduce your boundary, what are we doing? We recall the fact that in quantum mechanics, a wave function which is representing a particle must follow Born interpretation, because that is the only a function that has to be square integrable. Now, from our knowledge of vector algebra, I say that have you understood why we are talking about Hilbert space? কেন আমরা Hilbert space এর কথা বলছি? Have you understood that? Yes? I'm waiting for your response.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now I'll move on. Now, inner product, we said, is defined like this. Complex conjugate of one function, another function, their product, integrated from some boundary A to some boundary B. Now, there is a mathematical statement which is known as Schwarz inequality, which goes like this. You might think, why ma'am is suddenly showing us this complicated thing. You'll soon get to know. So Schwarz inequality says that modulus of this thing, integration a to b f star g dx, is always less than equal to root over integration a to b mod f squared dx, integration a to b mod g squared dx. Okay, this is a very well known relation in mathematics, which is known as Schwarz inequality. Okay? So which means that the inner product of two normalized wave functions is bound to exist in the Hilbert space, right? From why did we write down Schwarz inequality? Because it shows that the inner product is always less than the product of the normalized function. Obviously, then the inner product of two normalized wave functions therefore always belong to Schwarz inequality, always belong to Hilbert space, because these individually belong to Hilbert space. This is less than this quantity, so this must also belong to Hilbert space. Clear? Now, what is the inner product of a function with itself? F, which is f star f, which is mod f squared dx. So it is real, it is non-negative, and it cannot vanish unless fx is equal to 0. So when mod f squared integration a to b is equal to 1, then we say the function is normalized. And inner product of the vectors fm with fn is equal to delta mn, because we say they are orthonormal. This is equal to 1 only if m equal to n, and this is equal to 0 if n not equal to m, where delta mn is the Kronecker delta function. Okay. Now, if fx is represented by this summation, we know that usually the general solution If you recall your first class of quantum mechanics, where we did saw how Schrodinger, the solution of Schrodinger equation is observed, we saw that we get one solution and then the general solution is obtained by this summation of n such functions, n equal to 1 to infinity. Cn is a constant. Okay. Then we say that the set of functions is complete. So a function is normalized, is orthonormal, and is giving you a complete set of functions. Any other function in Hilbert space can be expressed as a linear combination of these functions. All right. So now we may recall what is the expectation value of an observable. It's called the average of the outcome of several measurements. This is how we define the expectation value in our bracket or inner product notation. We know this expression, integration psi star O psi dx. So in the bracket notation, it will be this opposite psi O psi. Okay, this is the inner product notation of expectation value. Now, since this is the average of outcome of measurements, expectation value must always be real. So O is always equal to O star, operator O, which means we can write this relation, psi operating on O psi equal to O psi on psi. So this is a Hermitian operator. Okay. So in quantum mechanics, all observables are represented by Hermitian operators. Since all observables have corresponding expectation values, and according to the definition of expectation values, all expectation values must be real. Therefore, any operator in quantum mechanics must be a Hermitian operator. Now, what is a determinate state? What is the reason for introduction of the expectation value? Because outcomes of different measurement of the same state are different. So there is an indeterminacy related to quantum mechanics. Remember, I always used to tell you that quantum mechanics is predictive. It doesn't tell you a definite answer, it doesn't give you a definite result. So there is an indeterminacy, which is why quantum mechanics is a probabilistic study, right? Now, suppose there exists a state for which the outcome of measurement for a given operator O is always the same, lambda. Then we can say it is a determinate state. যতবারই তুমি একটা অপারেটর ও কে ওই psi এর উপর অপারেট করাও, always you get the same result lambda. So we can say this is a determinate state. For example, stationary states are determinate states of the Hamiltonian. That is, measurement of total energy on a particle in such a state will always give you only the corresponding allowed energy level, that is En. Which means if it is a determinate state, then standard deviation must vanish. So this is the definition of standard deviation. And if you put the expressions, because O operating on the function is giving lambda, okay. So what you get is, okay. So this is why we put, since the result is always lambda, so in place of expectation value, I put the term lambda, which means therefore O psi equal to lambda psi. I hope all of you can identify this as the eigenvalue equation. Okay, so this is from where we get the concept of eigenvalue, that determinate states are eigenfunctions of the corresponding observable or operator. What is a determinate state? A determinate state is always an eigenfunction of the corresponding operator. How are we getting it? Because it is a determinate state, therefore its standard deviation must vanish. So we write down the expression of standard deviation. Since the expectation value is always lambda, we write lambda in place of expectation value O. So we get O minus lambda whole square. expectation value of that. So we write psi, the wave function over here. So basically, since this is O minus lambda whole square, we write it like this: O minus lambda acting on psi, O minus lambda acting on psi. This is the complex conjugate. This is the normal function. That is equal to 0 because standard deviation sigma square equal to 0. This is possible only if O psi equal to lambda psi. So this is giving you the eigenvalue equation. So basically, a determinate state is always an eigenfunction of the corresponding operator. So the outcome of measurements of an observable on such a state is the eigenvalue, and that is a certainty. Okay. So although we always say that quantum mechanics is a probabilistic study, is a predictive study, but the fact that we get eigenvalue equations and the fact that the wave functions are always eigenfunctions of the eigenvalue equation belonging to a certain eigenvalue and the eigenoperator. So eigenvalue, getting the eigenvalue is always a certainty. Okay, so this is again very, very important. Now let us talk about some eigenfunctions of Hermitian operators because they have some special properties. Now, observables and their physically determinate states are eigenfunctions of Hermitian operators that we just discussed. So, what are the properties of eigenfunctions in the Hilbert space? Since we saw that all functions belong to the Hilbert space, then we saw that all functions are eigenfunctions of the operators, and we also saw that all operators are Hermitian operators. We must talk about the hermiticity of eigenfunctions in the Hilbert space. First of all, eigenvalues for eigenfunctions of a Hermitian operator are real. Okay, eigenvalues of eigenfunctions of a Hermitian operator are always real. How do you prove that? O psi equal to lambda psi. O being Hermitian, therefore psi star O psi is equal to O psi whole star into psi, since it's a Hermitian operator. Okay, but O psi is lambda. O psi is lambda psi. So you take lambda outside and you get psi star psi. Again, this is also lambda. So lambda star psi star psi. These are equal. So lambda equal to lambda star. Because psi equal to 0 is a trivial solution. So lambda equal to lambda star, which means they are always real. Next is eigenfunctions belonging to distinct eigenvalues are always orthogonal. What is the proof? For a Hermitian operator, we know O psi equal to lambda psi, and let O phi equal to lambda prime phi. So O operating on psi gives you the eigenvalue lambda function psi, and O operating on some other function phi gives you the eigenvalue lambda prime. Okay. What do we have to prove? That eigenfunctions belonging to distinct eigenvalues are orthogonal. So psi and phi are distinct eigenfunctions belonging to different eigenvalues lambda and lambda star. So now O being Hermitian, so psi star O phi is O psi phi because O is a Hermitian operator. So for this you take out lambda prime, and for this you have lambda star. So since eigenvalues must be real, therefore lambda prime cannot be equal to lambda, which means the only other possibility is that psi star phi is 0, which in other words shows that the eigenfunctions are orthogonal. Okay, I know this is not very easy to understand straight away. So what my suggestion is that after you have your internal exams tomorrow, please properly go through these proofs. I'll also provide the notes. You know, I'll give you both the PowerPoint presentation as well as the notes. Please go through them properly, because in all likelihood you will get questions from these portions. You know that this time we are not making the questions. Questions are being prepared by the university. The university will send you questions. So please don't leave these portions out. You can always get proof like this. Prove that eigenvalues of eigenfunctions of a Hermitian operator are real. Prove that eigenfunctions belonging to distinct eigenvalues are orthogonal. These are very easy, but this is very new to you, which is why you might at the beginning, you know, feel a bit awkward about how to deal with such bracket notations. But believe me, once you get used to it, it is a very easy thing to deal with. So we get two very, very important results. One is that eigenvalues are real, and the other is eigenfunctions are always orthogonal. Now we move to the most important point of this discussion, is the commutativity of operators and how they are related to simultaneous eigenfunctions. Okay, now how did we define a commutator? A commutator is defined like this. This is the commutator, definition of a commutator, third bracket, OQ equal to OQ minus QO, where O and Q are operators. Okay, this is the definition of a commutator operator. Okay, so if they commute, then this is 0, then OQ equal to QO, and if they don't commute, then OQ not equal to 0, okay, and OQ not equal to QO. So two very important properties related to commutative operators are and eigenfunctions are as follows. One, operators that commute share the same set of eigenfunctions. When two operators commute, they share the same set of eigenfunctions. How do you prove that? Let us suppose that two operators O and Q commute. Okay. Additionally, O psi equal to lambda psi. Okay. And as they commute, so OQ psi equal to QO psi. So equal to Q lambda psi equal to lambda Q psi. Okay. So what are we getting? O operating on Q psi is giving you lambda into Q psi, which means that Q psi is an eigenfunction of O with the same eigenvalue lambda. So Q psi may at most be proportional to the eigenfunction psi. That is, we can write Q psi equal to lambda prime psi. And this relation is true for